If you get your signal-to-noise measurements wrong, you'll either over-engineer your design, chasing noise that isn't there, or ship a product that fails in the field. Textbooks show this perfect spike, but the real measurements look like this. And that mess is where SNR calculations can silently fail. Today I'll show you a practical signal-to-noise algorithm that adapts to the carrier shape, plus the key ideas behind FFTs and windowing that make it work. You'll also get the actual code. Let's get started. To understand why SNR measurements can go wrong, you only need a few FFT basics. I'll keep this minimal and it'll make the rest of the video much more clear. So a time signal graph shows a voltage versus time. A frequency domain graph called a spectrum shows a voltage versus frequency. If you create a signal with a single frequency like a sine wave, the frequency spectrum is ideally concentrated into a single point at the tone frequency, shown with the pink arrow. You'll notice I'm using dots here, not lines. It reminds us that we only know the signal at discrete sample points, and the spectrum has limited resolution. Switching from the time to the frequency domain can be done using an FFT. So I'm showing the main parameters of the time and frequency domain. The sample rate Fs is the first. It shows you how many times per second the value of the time domain signal is recorded. N is the number of samples of the time signal. Now the number of samples in the time signal is equal to the number of points, usually called bins, in the frequency spectrum. This basically says the longer you record a signal, the higher the resolution in the spectrum will be. T is the duration of the time signal and it sets the bin size in hertz. The frequency axis runs from 0 to the sample rate divided by 2 because of the Nyquist limit. In this video I'm using a single-ended power spectral density spectrum or PSD spectrum, so the units are voltage squared per hertz. That's all we need to know for now, and later you'll see why this matters, because we'll use it to turn the spectrum into RMS voltages. Now the perfect spectrum image you just saw here only exists in textbooks. Real life looks a lot worse, and that is where Windows come to the rescue. Let me explain. Here you see that perfect situation again. This is a very unique situation. You can only achieve this when the carrier frequency falls exactly on the bin frequency. Furthermore, if you were to stitch two of these time signals that you're converting to a frequency spectrum together, they have to form a perfectly continuous wave. The illustration on the left top of the spectrum shows this. The red line shows how the end of the time signal would line up with the beginning of that same time signal if you were to paste two instances of it together. This condition is nearly impossible to achieve in real-life measurements, because it would require the signal source and the signal analyzer to have their clocks locked together, and the signal frequency must match a bin frequency perfectly. You'd also need to capture an exact length of time signal. The thing that really frustrates me is that this spectrum graph is what's in all the textbooks. So when you get into a real-life situation for the first time, things can get really confusing. This is what you're faced with in real life, and it gets messy fast. So pasting the time signals together in this example results in a big discontinuity at the red line, and the tone frequency is not exactly on the bin. Now the cure for this issue is using window functions. Here you see that same spectrum but now with and without a window. You can see the huge improvement it makes. So what is a window exactly, and how does it achieve this impressive spectrum improvement? Let me show you. So a window is a function that is multiplied with your time signal. The function starts and ends at 0. This means that if you paste two time signals together, the discontinuity at the edges is almost completely gone. Here you see an illustration of several famous window functions and what they do to a time signal. On the left you see the shape of 4 window functions for a time signal with 1000 samples. As you can understand, the length of the window functions should match the length of the time signal. The confusing window here is the rectangular window. Since it is one everywhere, it is the same as having no window, but it was given its own name. On the right side you see the effect of a Hahn window when it is multiplied with a time signal. The envelope of the signal changes and the time signal starts and stops at 0. So, are there any drawbacks to this? Because you're changing the signal shape, the signal no longer consists of a single frequency, but of a number of frequencies close together. This shows up in your spectrum as the signal being spread out over a number of bins close to the center frequency of the signal. Here you see the shape of a tone in the spectrum using different windows when the tone frequency is exactly on the bin. This is the best case scenario, and as you can see there is not much difference between the windows. There's one really important detail here. The x-axis is the distance to the carrier center frequency in bins. This graph will remain exactly the same, independent of the bin size, sample rate or carrier frequency. If the x-axis would be in hertz, the width of the graph would change because the bin size changes and thereby the frequency of the x-axis. The fact that the shape is constant with an x-axis in bins is crucial for the SNR algorithm, as you'll see later on. So let's see what happens if a tone falls exactly between two bins, which is the worst case scenario and why SNR algorithms can disagree. As you can see, there are big differences between the different window functions now. The rectangular window is pretty bad and the Blackman-Harris looks very good. Now this image is zoomed in close to the carrier. If you zoom out a little, we get a different view of the performance of these windows. It's now clear that the Han window reaches the noise floor first, which is important for the SNR algorithm later as it decides how wide the cutout area for the carrier will be. So the SNR, or signal to noise ratio, is exactly what it says it is, the ratio between the RMS signal level and the RMS noise level. SNR is expressed in decibels and the formula to calculate it is shown here. So let's see how you get these values from a power spectral density spectrum. So this is a spectrum that we'd like to know the SNR of. First you'll need to determine the RMS level of the carrier. Let's zoom in on that carrier peak. Since the windowing has spread the voltage of this carrier over a few bins, you have to add a number of bins left and right of the highest peak in the spectrum together to get the total signal. Next you have to multiply this with the bin size in hertz. Because our spectrum is in volts squared per hertz, multiplying by hertz cancels the units, leaving us with volts squared. Then we just take the square root to get back to RMS volts, and then you have your RMS carrier voltage. Getting the noise is a little bit trickier. You have to cut out the carrier and then replace that area with the average noise floor. The pink tray shows what this noise floor should look like. What makes this tricky is the huge variation in carrier shapes you can get in different situations. Once you have this noise floor without a carrier, you do the same thing with all the noise floor values as you did for the carrier. Add them, multiply with the bin size and take the square root to get the RMS noise level. In my previous video, link in the description, I show in detail why noise floor should be converted to RMS voltages in this way. So the main challenge is finding out exactly how wide the carrier signal is so you can cut it from the spectrum, taking as little of the noise floor with it, because the more noise floor you take with it, the less accurate the SNR result will be. Let me show you how you can do that. Here you see the huge variation in carrier shapes that can occur with different signal conditions. With a low SNR, it's quite easy. The carrier is very narrow. When the SNR is high, however, you see that the carrier spreads out very wide and very slowly merges into the noise floor. Here it is much more tricky to detect the transition from carrier to noise floor. In this image you see the ideal locations for the carrier edges for each of the situations, right at the boundary of the carrier and the noise floor. So you need an algorithm that can do this. I've wasted 6 hours on 2 approaches that didn't work until I found the approach I'm about to show you that is very simple and does the job perfectly. Whenever something like this happens, I always think to myself, why didn't I come up with that last solution immediately? I wonder if you recognize this feeling. Let me know in the comments if you do. It might make me feel a little bit smarter. So let's have a look at this solution. This image shows how the algorithm works. The green arrows indicate small windows of around 20 bins. You first get a window in the center of the carrier, marked by 1. You calculate the average value of the bins in that window. Then you move the window to the right and take the average there, and so on. The value should keep decreasing until you hit the noise floor. Since the floor contains random numbers around a given average, the next window can be higher or lower than the previous one with a 50% chance for each of these options. Here you see the process in the form of a graph. As soon as the ratio between the current and the previous window was larger than 1, you found the noise floor. Due to the random nature of the floor, the exact location can vary a bit. You can clearly see that the values are all close to 1 in the noise floor, which indicates that this floor is flat. So at this point you store the frequency and you know the bin distance of the center frequency of the carrier to the noise floor. You can now cut out the carrier. However, this leaves a hole that needs to be filled up with the average level of the noise floor in the vicinity of the carrier. So how do you do that? To get the average value of the floor, you just take a number of bins above the point where the noise floor starts, average them and use that to fill in the area where the carrier used to be. And here you see the resulting noise floor without the carrier. You may think that the flat part of the noise floor, which is the average value of it, is too high. However, this is a PSD spectrum or squared spectrum in a log scale. This causes the average value to visually pull to the higher side of the noise band. So that's how the algorithm works. Now let's circle back to windows and choose the best one. So you want 2 things for this window. First, the window should reach the noise floor as soon as possible, because this will keep the carrier cutout zone small, keeping most of the original noise for better accuracy. Second, our algorithm relies on the carrier shape continuously dropping into the noise floor. Luckily, the Han window possesses both these properties, as you can see from this window shape comparison. The flat and Blackman-Harris window fall quicker at first, but they do so in a non-monotonic way and take longer to reach the floor. And I'm not even beginning to talk about the rectangular window. Now you can create an algorithm for each different window as I stated in my last video, but it will be less accurate because of what I just explained. When measuring, I think you should always choose a method that fundamentally allows for the highest accuracy. So that concludes all the details of the SNR algorithm. Let's look at the measurement setup. In the previous video video, I showed you how to create WAV test signals and I used my PC audio output to play those test signals. I want to measure a lot deeper now, so we'll use my high-performance audio DA converter this time, which has a very high SNR. I'm also going to use 24-bit WAV files instead of 16 to increase the SNR of the test signals. So the idea is that you play these WAV files on a PC, send the digital audio signal to the DA converter via an optical cable, send the analog signal from the DA converter to the QA403 and measure it using the QA403 application. When the measurement is finished, the time signal is exported to a CSV file to read it in Python. So here are the measurement results. The SNR is determined for a number of test signals with different SNR values. A few interesting things stand out. First, the accuracy drops if the SNR becomes higher. This is logical as the equipment has a limited SNR. The closer you get to this limit, the bigger the error will become. As you cross that limit, the error will keep increasing as the measured SNR simply cannot follow the WAV file SNR. The second thing that stands out is the very high accuracy of the measurement. When the SNR is lower than 100 decibels and far enough away from the noise floor of the instruments, the error drops to below 0.03 decibels. The next table shows the SNR accuracy versus the number of samples in the time signal. When you use more samples in the time signal, the spectrum will also get more and smaller bins. This basically causes more noise averaging, increasing the accuracy. From 256,000 samples onwards, you see that the error is lower than 0.01 decibels. What surprised me a bit is that even down to 4K samples, which is really not a lot, the accuracy is still very good. At 16K samples we have an outlier, which is what can happen when you work with noise and lower amounts of samples. You can have bad luck. If you use too few samples, at some point you'll get really unstable results, big differences between measurements, or even wrong results. So always increase the FFT length until you get repeatable, reliable results. There's a nice experiment that you can do. When you approach the noise floor, the error goes up. What would happen if we subtracted noise floor value from the measured RMS noise? In theory, that should allow you to retrieve the original SNR of the WAV file much deeper. This noise floor is caused by the noise of the DA converter and the QA403 combined. Here you see what happens. The error remains near zero up to 110 decibels of SNR. At 120 decibels, 7 dB above the SNR limit, the error is only 0.54 decibels. So this proves the error is caused by the constant floor in the equipment, which is what you would expect, but nice to see proof of. This specific way of solving problems, ignoring the textbook perfection and dealing with the messy reality, is exactly what my electronic product development course is all about. It's not just theory, it is the 32-year framework I use to prevent board respins and field failures. It's a start-to-finish system to get hardware right the first time. Link is in the description. There's also a 1-hour free module and a free 15-page checklist. So the SNR algorithm is accurate, reproducible and robust. Let's look at the Python code that makes it happen. Now I'm going to move through this high level and give a short demonstration. Don't worry about reading every line on your screen right now. I put the download link in the description so you can have a much better look at it yourself. This is the code that calculates the SNR. Let's start with the input fields. You can set the min and max frequency for the SNR calculation and the sample rate. You can choose an ideal time signal or one of the time signals captured using the QA403 by uncommenting one of the file name lines. They're part of the download. If you select an ideal time signal, you can set the peak values of the signal and noise, the frequency of the signal and the duration of the created time signal. The longer the time signal, the more samples you'll create and the smaller the FFT bins will become. In this piece of code, a measured time signal is loaded or an ideal time signal is created. Here you see a major part of the SNR algorithm. An FFT is done to create a PSD spectrum. Then the band of interest for SNR determination is cut out of the spectrum. Next, the carrier is cut out of the spectrum and the whole is replaced with the average noise. After that, spurious tones are removed. I'll show that in a bit more detail in a moment. This deals with distortion harmonics, for instance. Then the RMS value of the carrier is calculated by summing 5 bins left and right of the highest peak, multiplying with the bin size and taking the square root as demonstrated earlier. One of the things that is not yet covered is the spurious removal. Often there are distortion products that stick out of the noise or other unwanted signals. You want to cut those out or clip them to a very low level just above the noise. Since these are usually very narrow, it's not a problem if they stick out a little bit. The method used to clip them is called median absolute deviation. It determines where the most samples are in the noise spectrum, shown by the orange line, and creates an offset with respect to that level, the blue line, and clips everything that is higher to that level. In the image you can see a second harmonic being clipped. You also see the small hole that the carrier at 4 kHz has left in the noise floor. Next, the RMS voltage of the noise floor is calculated in a very similar way to the carrier. Just add all the bins, multiply with the bin size and take the square root. After that, the results are reported to the console and the SNR and average noise of the noise floor is calculated. I won't go into detail on the 4 functions that do the FFT, tone, spur removal and plotting of debug images. You can download the code with the link in the description. There are lots of comments in the code that show what's going on in there. This shows the files in the download directory. There are QA403 time signals, which are the captured files, WAV test signals, which you can play using a DA converter or your PC, a Python program to generate these WAV files yourself, and the SNR algorithm that was just shown. Okay, so I'll just give a short demo of how this works. So it begins with setting the input parameters, so I determine the SNR from 100 to 10,100 Hz, the sample rate is 48 kHz, and I select 0, which means that it loads an actual measured signal. Now in this case the 120 decibels signal at 64 kilosamples. Let's see what happens if we run this. I chose this one because it has a few spurious, so you can actually see that the spurious is being clipped. And you see some other intermediate results. This is an intermediate result from the edge of the noise floor search algorithm. Here you see the spectrum with the noise with the carrier cut out and the replaced noise floor. And here you see the spurious removal. Here in the bottom you see the actual measurement results in the console. Now it's 130 decibels because this is way below the limit. So if we select for instance 50 decibels, which is way above the limit and SNR limit, and run it again, then you see 50.02, which is of course incredibly impressive. Now something else you can do, you can select an ideal time signal and then over here you can set the frequency and the level of the signal and the noise. So 1 second means that you have bins of 1 Hertz. So let's go exactly on a bin. So 2000 Hertz the frequency. We have 7.8 mega. That is more related to a 24-bit signal, which has a range of 8.2 mega or million. And we have a certain level of noise. Let's run that and see what happens. Now again, you get the debug plots here. And let's see, this is apparently a 50 decibels SNR. Now what you can see in the output, the ideal SNR based on these parameters over here is 50 decibels and the actual determined SNR is 50.01, and it also shows in even more digits what the error is. So you can see it's incredibly accurate. So that was just a short demo to get you started if you want to run this. I use Anaconda and Spider. This IDE is called Spider. I find it pretty handy, but you should be able to run this in any Python IDE. So if you like this kind of thorough approach to electronics, check out my electronic product development course, which contains many hours of high information density videos. This makes it easy to quickly refresh certain topics later when you need them for a project, since you get lifetime access. It shows my exact system to get electronics projects right the first time based on my 32 years of professional experience. This course is often bought by employers for their employees. Links in the description. You can check out the previous video up here, which shows how to generate SNR WAV files, how to calculate noise floors, and how I check the calibration of the QA403. See you next time.